Hello, I'm Bridgette Hylton, and this is Sanam Zaer, and we're part of A Better Shrewsbury. We're so excited today to have two representatives with us from the Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services right here in Shrewsbury. We're pleased to have Allie and Jennifer, and we're going to give them a chance just to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll do our random question for the day. How does that sound, ladies?
Sure.
All right. Do you want to go first?
Sure, I do. So my name is Jen Rifkin. I am the clinical director at SYFS. I've been there for about 5 years now, so I run our sort of day-to-day operations with our clinic.
Great.
Awesome, and I'm Alison Eccleston. I'm the Director of School-Based Services. I've also been at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services for about 5 years, and I run all of our school-based programming.
Oh, great. Okay, awesome. We're really excited to have you guys here. We just feel like mental health, especially behavioral health with kids, such an important topic right now. So we're really excited and honored to have you on the show. We love to start every episode with a random question. And today's random question is very close to my heart. The question is, what would you do to prep for a zombie apocalypse?
I'm going to let you start with that one.
Sure. I feel like there is heavy emphasis on water and canned goods, and I feel like I'm trying to head towards a boat. That's where I think I am.
Do you know how to operate a
I
boat?
think I'm going to figure out.
Okay, you're
once I
going to
get
figure it
there.
out.
We're
You're going to
wait
figure
a
it out.
little
You're pretty
bit.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to figure it out.
You know,
Got it.
I feel like I'm going to assume there's a manual on the boat because that would be important.
Can work with that.
You know,
Would you take anyone on the boat with you, or you
I would like to think I was going to take my husband and child.
Yes, for
Yeah,
sure.
I would like to include them. In a perfect world, my cats as well. I don't know if that always happens or plays out in the movies where I've done my research, but that's what I would like to include for sure.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good plan. Good plan.
Now, I have limited research because I'm not really a zombie person. My approach would probably be to try to go and make friends with the zombies. I love to cook, so maybe invite them over for a meal.
All right.
Food instead of me. I don't know that this is a real viable option, but I'm gonna play to my strengths.
I think it depends on
You'll
the zombie
actually
universe
be a
you're in.
zombie.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially.
So yeah.
Possible.
Yeah.
It's an alternative approach.
Alternative
It's not-
approach. I feel like I feel like a lot of people might go that way, you know, just like, oh, they come in peace and then see what happens. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think I learned more with Allie. I think I would bundle resources. I would love to get to an island, whether it's the Vineyard or Nantucket or Block Island or somewhere where it's manageable land space so that you can have better control over what's going on versus these wide open spaces of the United States. It's a little bit much.
Yeah.
But I think that would be my ideal locale, is to be on an island and become the sheriff.
I was actually also going to say island, but I
Yeah.
would go even further, like maybe
Caribbean?
Yeah, Caribbean. No,
I
even
just think
further.
it'd be hard to get
let's
there.
just go.
Okay.
No, but
Easter
I
Island?
feel like I would know the apocalypse is coming before it actually comes. Like even the pandemic.
Yeah.
I was kind of, reading material from trusted sources saying that there's a pandemic coming, and I kind of was starting to prepare before it actually happened. So I feel like I would be aware that the apocalypse was coming enough to buy a nice ticket to maybe Sao Tome, the Galapagos Islands, something really just out there.
Before travel's just.
Before the airlines catch whiff of the zombies and cease
Super
travel.
proactive.
Yeah, exactly.
Super proactive.
Gotta stay ahead of the game.
That's true.
Ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was very interesting,
Yeah.
and maybe some of that will trickle down into our conversation. Let's find out.
We'll find out.
I don't know. All right. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, what is SYFS, and kind of how long has the organization been in Shrewsbury, and the work that you all do.
Yeah, so Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services has been around since the 1980s. It used to be called Shrewsbury Community Services, and then about, I think it was like 2016-ish, we received a federal grant to provide what's called youth mental health first aid, which is something that we continue to do today. We actually got another federal grant. We've trained about 6,000 teachers across the state in youth mental health first aid. We also can train adults in mental health first aid, and we've even, we're part of a pilot program, a national pilot program where we were one of 35 sites across the country to try out what's called teen mental health first aid, where we train an entire grade of students on how to help their peers, essentially. So that was sort of when SYFS started to expand. But at its core, SYFS is really a mental health serving or mental health agency where we serve not just children, but we serve folks all the way up into adulthood and older adulthood. So we have, like I said, a clinic that we operate, and that's primarily my job, where we see kids for individual, family, group therapy. And then Alison runs our school-based services program, which she can tell you about.
Yeah, so and school-based services, so we started out just contracting with Shrewsbury Public Schools, were essentially students that were identified by the district that needed extra supports or resources outside of school would connect with me, and we would essentially help find a variety of resources. That could be anywhere between, and the majority of the time it's counseling referrals to help address mental health needs, but it's also gone beyond that at times. So we've been able to try to help people apply for mass health insurance, obtain food stamps, trying to get people on housing waiting lists. And over the past 5 years, that's extended. So now we are officially serving, I believe it's 6 school districts as of right now. Well, technically 5 districts and a private school. So it's really just ramped up over the years. And we also provide some counseling to some of the students as well.
Wow.
That's great. That's great. And it's the right time for it, right? So we know with the pandemic sort of coming to a close, but also with a lot of the violence that we're seeing in schools across the country, and with social media being in the hands of more and more teens and earlier and earlier ages, that we're starting to see these spikes in sort of needs for children in schools and families. And so it's an important time to have a resource like this in our community and in other communities as well. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
I was actually talking to one of my friends about this, and we were kind of debating about if it's an actual spike or if we just have more language to talk about issues that we've been facing for generations. I come from an immigrant family, and there are no mental health issues in our parents, our grandparents. It just doesn't exist. It does exist, but they just don't talk about it, and they're not diagnosed. So whenever I go to the doctor, do you have any diagnosable illnesses in your family? No, I don't, because this is not something that we really discuss past our generation. So I guess that's the question I have for you guys: are we seeing a actual spike, or do you think some of that is just how we're talking about it as a society now?
I think it's a little bit of both. To be honest, I absolutely think the mental health literacy that's out there now versus even like 5 years ago it's a dramatic difference. And I think folks are much more comfortable talking about mental health, identifying mental health issues, and trying to sort of address them as soon as possible instead of waiting till you're at a crisis point. So I do think that is there, and for better or for worse, I think the pandemic has kind of helped us sort of reckon with that. The reality is that there was already a mental health crisis prior to the pandemic, and at this point things are on fire. I brought a little data with me, just figured I'd share it. So in 2011, so not that long ago, 28% of students, and this is nationally, this is just a sort of a standard survey that folks in Massachusetts get, folks in Oklahoma get, like all over across the state, across the country. 28% in 2011 of high school students reported feeling sad or hopeless. That number spiked to 42% in 2021, which is the most recent data that we have. That is a huge spike that is beyond just mental health literacy. Similarly, in 2011, same time frame, 13% of high school students reported feeling suicidal ideation or feelings, thoughts about suicide. And that number has spiked to 22%, which is just really, really alarming. The good news is in Massachusetts, I think we do have a wealth of resources, even though the wait lists are pretty horrific. Massachusetts has one of the more robust mental health systems in the United States. And I think some of that's sort of reflected in lower numbers. Our 2021 numbers are, for folks who are feeling sad or hopeless, instead of 42%, we're at 33.5%. And then for suicidal ideation, instead of being at 22, we're at just under 13%. So I do think our mental health resources are a huge factor in that. And at the same time, we still have a third of our high school students saying, I'm in pain, I am feeling hopeless. That's a huge number, and frankly, it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
It is. It's alarming. So 2 things. One, I think a lot of what I'm seeing in my home, I have emerging teenagers in my household. And I think what I'm seeing is when we were growing up, and probably likely the both of you as well, we didn't have constant connection with the outside world. There was this place where you came home after school and maybe you got to call one of your friends after school for 30 minutes. Maybe you got to log on to AIM and chit chat for a couple of minutes. And then, or you went outside and you played and you'd play games and that was your community. Now, a lot of kids, it seems like the whole world is their community because of TikTok, because of Snapchat, because of just the constant news cycle that we're in. And it seems like, I'm certainly not anti-social media, but there's something that I think about that constant stimulation and connection that may be damaging to our kids.
Oh, without a doubt. The CDC actually just came out
the
last week. Or was it
with recommendations.
Yeah, with recommendations to limit social media because there's a direct link. There's emerging studies indicating there's a direct link between social media use and the decline of adolescent mental health. So
I believe it. I believe it. I mean, and that's the thing. I'm like, I tell my kids, you're not supposed to be living with your friends at 11 or 12 or 13. Nope. And that's what it feels like sometimes because they're constantly in contact. And I'm like, there has to be times when it's no contact outside the house, just us, So I try to maintain that in my home, but it's hard and it's increasingly hard. And I can see how as they get older, how that for a lot of parents is going to be a challenge, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, I feel like I've read a lot of articles in the last week or two on this particular issue. And one of the big problems I think is just parents don't have the capacity to sort of police is the wrong word, but police this issue, monitor the issue, monitor this, nor are there really guidelines for how do you do this as a parent. So I think that does become really challenging.
No, I don't have that kind of time. That's why I've banned YouTube for my kids unless they're directly in front of me because I can't control it. I even had kids YouTube when they were younger. Oh yeah. But then I would lean over and see what they're looking at, and they once they were 3 or 4 and they were watching a video of Moana and Maui making out like 2 dolls, and I was like, okay, I can see how this ended up in the kids section, but I also don't want my kids watching something like this that's sexualizing 2 characters that aren't even romantically interested in each other. So it was just so many. Yeah. So I just pulled YouTube off of their computers and I said, forget it, we're just not.
Well, and I think what that ties into too is I know that a lot of the focus is on social media, but it's really the internet.
Yeah, it's the internet.
It's just the internet at whole, which in some ways it's a great resource, right? It is a wonderful way to make connections, learn certain things, stuff like that. But, unless there's some pretty significant supervision or censorship, there's also some access to some profoundly unhealthy things, not just for adults, but children. And having exposure to that with no context, no education or understanding has led to some pretty significant behavioral and mental health issues for kids.
Yeah, and I mean, the phones, thankfully now I feel like the phone companies and things are waking up and they're trying to give parents more tools, on how to limit screen time, how to monitor it and all of that. And I'm very grateful for those tools. But I think for a lot of kids, maybe this is a day late and $1 short because the damage has already been done and you can't really rein it. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak.
Right. Well, and also they're just so smart.
Yeah.
They really are.
I'll
So I think part of the problem too is a lot of the times when parents are putting in their first round of blockages and stuff like that, they just find a way to
I've had that experience personally.
Yeah.
I've been personally victimized by Regina George in my home.
Yeah.
So that's 100% true.
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation with my husband the other day because our 9-year-old was asking us some questions that we didn't necessarily want to answer at her age. And he was sort of taking the stance of, we're not going to answer these questions. And I said, I'm absolutely going to answer these questions because she has access to the internet. Yep. And I said, if I don't answer it, she's going to go on Google and she's going to see some crazy version of this that I can't navigate, I can't undo. Yeah. So he agreed with me once he kind of had that context, but it's true. They can just go online and search for anything that they want, and there's all kinds of weird paths that they can go down.
Oh yeah.
I've kind of learned through experience that blocking it is just a temporary fix. You really need to teach the kids how to navigate it, how to use it, and how to seek out the information they want without
trusted sources.
Trusted sources.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, because if you go on TikTok, my son will always come to me with these random facts. He gets to use TikTok for 30 minutes every day, 30 minutes to an hour, and he'll come and be like, "Did you know that?" And it's something that's totally bogus, and I'm like, not everything that you hear on TikTok is right. There was this great ad campaign in the 90s actually with a house hippo. It was from Canada, but I remember seeing it as a kid, and I showed my kids this video where they're like, they did this very serious type of commercial about how every house has a house hippo, and they go out at night and they take chips from the pantry, and then at the end of it, it's like, did you believe this was real or not? And it's explaining to kids that not everything you see on the internet, or well, at that time it was television, is real. But I mean, I think there need to be more guardrails like that in place.
It's nighttime in a kitchen just like yours. All is quiet. Or is it? The North American house hippo is found throughout Canada and the eastern United States. House hippos are very timid creatures and are rarely seen, but they will defend their territory if provoked. They come out at night to search for food, water, and materials for their nests. The favorite foods of the house hippo are chips, raisins, and the crumbs from peanut butter on toast. They build their nests in bedroom closets, using lost mittens, dryer lint, and bits of string. The nests have to be very soft and warm. House hippos sleep about 16 hours a day.
That looked really real, but you knew it couldn't be true, didn't you? That's why it's good to think about what you're watching on TV and ask questions, kind of like you just did. A message from Concerned Children's Advertisers.
Now with AI,
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
going down a
that's
really dark path
scary
now. Yeah.
path.
Well, let's pivot a little bit, I think, from the technology stuff, because I think that could be a whole other episode that we could have. And let's
So I
talk
guess
a little bit
what
about.
what are some things you guys are doing to combat some of these issues, like to stay ahead of it? I guess to
Like social media in general, or
no, not social
or, like,
media.
mental
Some of
health?
these rates, mental health. So these increasing mental health concerns. Is there anything that SYSF is doing to prevent sort of having kids that are in crisis?
And I think before even the SYFS in Massachusetts, because we had this case years and years ago called Rosie D that led to the development of the Childhood Behavioral Health Initiative
Yep.
in Massachusetts, and CBHI services kind of give kids here that wraparound.
Yep.
And I know you guys do a lot of that work, so maybe if you could,
Yeah, and both of us actually come from CBHI backgrounds,
Yes.
so we're very familiar.
Very familiar.
Yeah, so in terms of what we can, actually, why don't you go first, because you're the wraparound person. I'll talk about my
Sure.
work in mental health first
So
aid in
yeah,
a minute.
so essentially what we do through the school-based services is we try to provide wraparound and are essentially our version of it. So essentially what we're doing is with the kiddos that are being identified, we meet with the parents and we talk about what the school is noticing, we talk about their personal concerns, and what we essentially try to do is we identify the appropriate level of mental health support to them, and we try to connect them with that based on essentially their insurance companies, which can be really, really difficult, especially because I think, one, just finding a provider in general is really hard, but I think in general there's been a lot of misinformation or confusion, especially around like some recent legal changes with mass health and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. And with the kids that are clearly need immediate support, because again, the wait lists are so astronomical right now. Like I think the shortest that we've heard of is 6 months, really. We've been providing some immediate counseling support in the schools for the kids that have been identified, to at least provide some sort of skill set or our tools to help sort of regulate them until the longer term support can come in.
Yeah.
And then sort of on the larger scale piece, I mentioned earlier, mental health first aid. So mental health first aid is essentially a public education program that teaches folks to identify and respond to an emerging mental health situation or a mental health crisis. And there's an adult mental health first aid program that teaches adults how to do this with adults. There's a youth mental health first aid program, and that's the one hands down that we do the most of, that teaches adults how to respond to youth and sort of recognize what's going on with youth. And then obviously I mentioned earlier the teen program. But I think that's such an effective intervention. It's really a prevention type intervention.
What kinds of things are they learning in this mental health first aid?
So you're learning how to recognize signs and symptoms of emerging mental health issues. That's a big piece. And then for the youth program, you're putting that in the context of like adolescent development. Like, is this normal that a child is sort of giving up some of these activities? It's not necessarily a sign of depression. It's a sign of a kid is sort of, I'm just going to focus on dance. I'm not going to do dance and soccer and karate. But if the child is like, I'm not going to do dance, I'm not going to do soccer, I'm not going to do karate, I'm spending an inordinate amount of time in my room, I'm having issues with sleep, I'm a little bit more irritable than usual, that might be a sign that there is something a little bit more going on than might be typical adolescent development. And so there's also an action plan, sort of an intervention plan that mental health first aiders will learn with a large focus on non-judgmental listening, which is a skill that is easier said than done. It's something I work at every day as a human being and certainly as a clinician. But that's a big piece of it. And there's so much data out there that says if youth can be connected to like one particular trusted adult, it can have protective and resiliency factors up the yin yang. So we really feel like this is a very effective way to help youth find that one person, because that one person may now have training in sort of how to do this. And it's an evidence-based practice. There's a ton of science behind it.
So if this is something people wanted to get this training, is this something where they can sign up, or does it happen through their employer, or like how does this?
That's a great question. So we do periodically, not often, but do periodically sort of offer community classes where anyone can sort of go and sign up. People can always reach out to me. I'm more than happy to sort of talk to folks about trying to get a class here in Shrewsbury. I think the last one we offered was like this fall, maybe, for the community. We have, I mentioned earlier, we have a federal grant, which will allow us to offer this class for free for the next 4 years. So we've got plenty of time to do this, and it costs people nothing. And then in terms of if you work in an organization or a company that has about 10, 15, 20 people, we can come in and we can run classes for you guys. And certainly school districts, we train all the time. I mentioned before, we've trained about 6,000 teachers across the state. And so that's something that we do on a very regular basis. We have, I think, 5 trainers. So it's a big part of what we do.
Yeah, I actually attended the mental health first training through SYSF.
Awesome.
Yeah, recently. Nice. Yeah, and actually the things those were the messages that resonated with me. The one, trusted adult, non-judgmental.
Oh, good.
And also the third thing I would add is asking questions, because I think sometimes we think that, if you say the word suicide, you're going to plant that idea in someone's head, but that's just not the case. And it might. I've actually unfortunately had to ask a few people that question in my life, and and if I didn't, I wouldn't have known that that was factually accurate. So that's super important. And I was thinking maybe we can do a Better Shrewsbury training or something like that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Going back to this data, so this data is kind of more general, but so Shrewsbury High School, they did a survey of students to kind of gauge where they're at, and there were a lot of disparities between, like, racial disparities in the students that are feeling isolated, and students are feeling more depressed, students of color, LGBT students. So I guess what is SYFS doing to kind of address some of these disparities? Are there any specific targeted programs or anything that you guys are doing, or education campaigns?
So I would say, first and foremost, just because you mentioned LGBTQ plus kids, those are the folks who are most at risk. The numbers I mentioned before, nationally, folks who are feeling hopeless and sad, it was 42% of adolescents. For kids who identify as LGBTQ, 69%.
Wow.
69%. And then for folks who are experiencing suicidal ideation, high school students, right now the national average is 22%. For LGBTQ kids, it's 45%. It's just staggering numbers.
Failing them.
Staggering numbers. So one of the things, both Alison and I, we've talked about this pretty extensively. We are absolutely not a LGBTQ specialized agency. That being said, I think we do a very good job of treating our kids who identify as LGBTQ. I think we are particularly skilled in that without being sort of a specialized agency. But there are agencies out there, and that would be something you might potentially want to connect a child with, especially if it's really important for them, for their provider to have lived experience. That would be, Open Sky has a wonderful program.
And being in Massachusetts,
available.
that's another thing. We have Out Metro West and different resources that are available for kids who identify as LGBTQ+. So that's really great that there are so many resources here. It's not the same everywhere else in the country.
That is
right?
very true.
So that's fortunate.
I think one of the other things to note is that this is more national data, but girls seem to be struggling a little bit more than boys right now. And you know, you mentioned earlier, before we sort of started our taping here, are you going to be doing your leadership program this summer? Leadership is like a girls empowerment program, and it really is geared towards girls and helping them develop self-esteem, helping them develop healthy friendships, learning how to communicate with one another. And we are going to be offering that again through Sherwood's Summer Enrichment Program. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, I had mentioned my daughter did that last year. Kind of going on that same topic, do you guys, so girls vocalize having more mental health issues, but with boys, I mean, knowing a lot of young boys myself, I suspect that there may be a vocalization issue in those numbers where they're not actually vocalizing those issues.
Well, yeah, we know that the majority of the school violence that we're seeing, the shootings in particular, are happening at the hands of young men. We know that the vast majority of murder is committed by men, especially with kids, and so it seems to be that there's this unspoken gap there, right? That we're all kind of thinking about, but no one seems to know what to do with, right?
Yeah, the shootings at 90
something,
97,
97,
90 something.
98,
It's
something
not
crazy.
even like
Close.
you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah,
even
not even
call
close.
it both genders. Yeah.
No,
so
I mean, I think you have to look at this as a public health issue.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of gun violence, I think there's really, at this point, there is no other choice. You have to look at this as a public health issue, and I'm sure that there are people on other side of the political spectrum from me that would feel differently, and that it's all a mental health issue, but I don't think it's all a mental health issue. Folks that have mental health issues are much more likely to harm themselves than others. And I'm not saying that mental health doesn't play a large role in what's going on with the violence in our country right now, but it's more than just mental health. There's so much, particularly around the gun violence. Like, this is a
There's
public
a lot of
health
policy
issue,
stuff that we have to talk about.
without
too.
a doubt.
So we're going to be wrapping up soon. So I know that parents may be wondering, what are some things that they should be concerned about with their own children? And I think that's a good way to kind of wrap it up. I know you said, staying in the room, not being interested in the things that they used to be all across the board. Are there any other signs or things that you think parents should be looking for when it comes to their kids?
Yeah, I think, we're a really big proponent of, like, parents are the expert on their kids. So you're just going to know if something just feels off. And I think the most important thing you can do is ask.
That's a good one.
Just ask.
So as a mom, there's this thing like, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing.
Nothing.
But that's baseline, right?
Right,
So
right.
I'm like, that's baseline. So if I get something else, then I'm like, wait a second, something's up, So it's knowing your
My
kids.
daughter's kindergarten teacher sent home this worksheet of what you can ask aside from how was your day. And I actually still have it up in our bathroom because I remember we used to give baths, and while we gave baths, I would just go down the list and just ask all these questions.
Who'd you play with?
at
Who'd you have
lunch?
lunch with? Yeah.
Did something make you laugh or cry today? All of these. So
Yeah.
I think those are
Good
those are helpful
questions.
to have too.
Keeping the communication open, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think just even being comfortable with maybe having a conversation that's uncomfortable, right? A conversation that you maybe haven't had to have before, and just saying, hey, I know you're saying everything's fine, and I'm super glad to hear that, but I just want you to know that I love you so much, and I've just noticed you've seemed really down recently. The schools kind of talked about how you haven't been turning your work as much, and it just seems like you're not yourself, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you, and I want to be supportive to you in any way that I can. And if there's anything going on that you're having a tough time with, I would love to be able to support you with that.
I think that's awesome advice. And if all else fails, you can ask them how they might prep for the zombie apocalypse.
Yep.
Well, thank you both so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you being here and for all the work that you're doing in the community and with our students. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.